Welcome to the Switchblade Sisters Social Club, a true crime podcast where two sisters exploit their worst fears for your entertainment. You're welcome. I'm Dee.
And I'm Rhonda, and together we are the Sake Sisters. For more information, check out our website at www.switchbladesistersocialclub.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at Switchblade Sisters Social Club.
Thanks for listening. Hey everyone, welcome to Switchblade Sisters Social Club, the true crime podcast where two sisters exploit their worst fears for your entertainment. You're welcome. I'm Dee.
And I'm Rhonda.
Hi.
Hi.
So I have just been, are you taking pictures for social?
Yep. Can I do that again?
Yeah.
Do that again.
Wait, get the cushion in.
Okay, good stuff.
So I have just been reading a news article which has been horrifying, and it's really relevant considering our talk last week about, you know, only the baby that cries gets the milk, how you really have to cause a stink to get what you need in this life. So it's kind of off the back of that I wanted to raise it here, because it's a story of Ellie Wilson. And this woman, bless her, she was raped by someone who's been convicted of it, so I can say his name, Daniel McFarlane, and I think it was up in Scotland. And even though this went to court and she had audio footage of him confessing to the rape and text messages with him confessing to the rape, the jury was still not unanimous.
Why? What more do you get than a confession?
Do you know what I mean? Like, what more do they have to do? And listen to the text. I mean, it's like, it's chilling.
Oh, God.
She asks him, do you not get how awful it makes me feel when you say, I haven't raped you, when you have? He says, Ellie, we've already established that I have. The people that I need to believe me, believe me. I will tell them the truth one day, but not today.
What the fuck?
And then she says, she asks him how he feels about what he's done. And he says, I feel good knowing I'm not going to prison.
So why the fuck was this not enough evidence for them?
I don't know. And it just sadly highlights that, like, even with all of this evidence, because, you know, lots of women, lots of people, I shouldn't say women, lots of people of all genders, non-binary, etc., are scared to come forward, partly because of the shame, partly because of stories like this. I mean, luckily this guy was convicted of rape, but so many people are villainized when they come forward because
the other thing is
been abused in some way.
Yeah, and the other thing is also that the statistics are horrific for the amount that are actually, like, rapes that are actually convicted. Right? Yeah. I don't know them off the top of my head, but every time I hear them, I just think, well, more people get away with it than are convicted, you know?
It's so awful. So not only are people scared to come forward, but when they do, it's such a low chance of a conviction. So no wonder people are terrified of coming forward. This woman, so brave, she waived her anonymity. So she was happy, and she now works on promoting this issue and supporting people in a similar situation. So what a fucking brave, amazing woman. I was just shocked by that.
Yeah. I don't know on what grounds that wasn't enough evidence for them.
I'm fascinated. I'm going to do a bit more research because I would love to know what the defense's argument was, how they managed to convince those jury members that didn't, that said that he wasn't guilty. What argument swayed them, really?
Do you know what? Some solicitors are fucking dicks. The ones that take on cases where you know that person's guilty, how do they live themselves?
Well, I know that some of them have to. Like, everyone has the right to a defense. I don't know what the situation is in terms of, like, can you pass on a case if you're like, no, this guy is 100% guilty, fuck that. So I don't know, but fuck being in a situation where you got to defend someone like this, you know? So that was just shocking to me. So like I said, I'm going to do a bit more research. I'll come back to you if I find anything interesting, but what an amazing lady. Ellie Wilson, you're a fucking legend.
Yeah.
So on that note, it's separate. I don't know how I'm going to segue here because that's a very serious issue. And I have a very important question to ask you because I want your advice and the listeners' advice, but it's totally off topic. And I don't want it to seem insensitive that we've gone on from rape to this, but just know that this is how our distracted minds work and we mean no offense by it. But my very important question to you, should I get rollerblades?
No, you're clumsy. You have dyspraxia. No way. Why?
All right. Okay, interesting argument, because Paul's argument was also no, but he was like, where the fuck are you going to go roller skating?
And who with? Who the fuck are you going to go with? No, the answer's no. You can barely walk. No.
True. Like fucking Bambi. Yeah, because I would just love some. I've been looking at some. They're so fucking cute. But like, I'm not going to the park roller skating, am I? And I was thinking, oh, I'm not going to go into town roller skating.
Look, Dee, you can never go on your own because there's going to be an accident. So you're going to need to find somebody else who's willing to partake in this madness.
So I need someone else to roller skate with me.
Yeah, but ideally, no. I don't think I can sleep knowing that you're
all right. I think I'll unfollow.
I'm not even comfortable with you driving.
I'm better at driving than walking on my own.
That's why I need you to text me whenever you get somewhere.
I don't want you putting out in the world that I'm not a good driver.
Look, I would say we can both drive in a straight line. We are both shit maneuverers. Let's be honest.
I'm really good at maneuvering.
We know that's not true. We've both dinged a lot of shit maneuvering.
I haven't. Not since I first learned how to drive.
Okay, I'll let you have that one. But you're not getting rollerblades. I can't
okay.
cope. I can't. My anxiety can't cope with that.
Not rollerblades. Roller skates.
Which one's worse? I don't know. Are they?
Well, I mean, roller skates are a little bit easier.
The only ones you're allowed, and even this I'm not comfortable with, is those Fisher Price ones that go on top of your shoes.
What about Heelys? They do them in adult sizes.
Okay, those may be better because you can walk with those as shoes, right? But you'd have to wear what are those things called? Armbands?
Armbands and knee, yeah.
They have to wear all that. It's never going to happen.
And a helmet. No, you're right. I should just...
And you're not going to find...
What about... Oh my God.
I was just going to say that you're not going to find a willing participant, but in your fucking circle...
You know I would.
Yeah.
I'm also very good at convincing people to do things. Do you know what the problem is? I think I have transfer addiction or something. Not that I was ever an alcoholic, but I don't drink at all pretty much anymore, except when I go out, and then I do tend to get wasted. But on the whole, I don't drink anymore.
What's transfer addiction?
So I think I've moved over from drinking to shopping.
Oh, with you've always got to have a next thing. You are like, you've always got to have a next thing.
It's fun to have a hobby. A hobby.
Yeah, you do. You're a hobby accumulator.
Not many of them stick.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what does stick, literally. My cross stitching. Can we post some of my fun cross stitching?
Yeah. Dee is a wizard with a cross stitch.
And not quite. It's fairly easy to do. So to be honest,
you know what? I'll post a picture on our socials of the one you made me that's in my hallway.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But I do tend to like the sweary cross stitching.
Yeah, of course. What other kind is there?
I don't know. But yeah, whenever I tell people like cross stitch, they're like, oh, did your grandmother teach you? And it's like, yeah, kind of, but I don't think she meant for me to use it in this capacity. So yeah, we'll post some of them. What other ones? Some of my favorites. Oh, I just made a little video. You could share it. Did you see the one I uploaded this morning?
To where?
To our video folder on our G Drive.
Oh God, I thought you meant to the socials. I got nervous.
No. Don't worry, I'll stay away from the socials. But yeah, it's of my snake bumblebee, but it's got one of my cross stitches there, which I made for Paul one day, maybe his birthday or maybe Valentine's Day, probably Valentine's Day, and it says, "You're my favorite person, but you can be a real cunt."
That's good. I'll post it.
Yeah. All right. So today is my turn to tell you. Are you ready?
Yeah,
I'm ready. Checking our makeup.
I'm done. Okay.
It's really
Okay, this is my favorite. Do you know what? This is so nice because I love a Friday because it feels like a day off when we record our podcast episodes. And oh, do you know what? Last episode we recorded, which was just about half an hour ago, was on the Lululemon murders. And guess what just showed up? While I was eating my leftover noodles as a fucking advert on Instagram. I am not buying Lululemon's bloodstained fucking leggings. They're
right.
overpriced fucking bloodstained leggings.
We should try to find out if they've changed any of their policies as a result of that. Because one saving grace would be if they changed their policies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Anyway, old news. That's last week. I can't wait to hear the story. Story time with Dee.
I am going to bet that you've never heard of this case.
Probably not. Tell me.
Okay, so this case was inspired by a trip that I took, that I was really fortunate to take in 2016 to Perth in Australia. And it was really, really, really stressy time because you remember it was around about the time that you were due. Mm-hmm. And as it happens, the twins were, 6-7 weeks early?
Mm-hmm. 6 weeks, yeah.
So they were born before I went, but it's still, the end result was the same in that I didn't want to go for that long because I wanted to just come back and be with you and the new little twins and everything. So it was a bit of a chaotic time in my life, but it was when I was working for St. John Eye Hospital, which is a chain of hospitals in Palestine. For those of you who don't know, my sister and I, we are half Palestinian, half Flemish Belgian. So any other Belgistinians out there, get in touch.
We are so close genetically to Gigi and Bella Hadid, except they're Palestinian and Dutch.
I mean, we're basically the same people. Do you know what I mean?
Where did it all go wrong for us?
I don't know. So I got invited to Perth to the St. John conference, where St. John, like here in the UK, they run the ambulance service as well as first aid training and stuff. But it was really interesting because the difference being, okay, so Western Australia, it's a misguiding name. It actually is the half of Australia is Western Australia. So you can imagine the size of it. And Perth is the capital city of Western Australia, but it is so far from anything. It's the most remote city in the world. So the difference being that the distances that the ambulance services have to travel are just beyond belief to someone that lives in the UK, which is a relatively small island. So, for example, I spoke to one EMT sort of ambulance driver who said that on average, because she's in rural Western Australia, on average, her call-outs were about an 800-mile round trip.
Shut the fuck up. I was thinking like half hour. Jesus. 800 miles is not even something you can drive in a day.
I mean, they have, obviously, ambulance helicopters and so forth because the terrain is rural. The distances are massive. So it's just like beyond comprehension for us, I think, right? Because can you imagine 200 miles to go pick up someone, 200 miles to go to the hospital or the clinic, and then, 200 miles back or whatever. It's a very common journey, and that's 600 miles.
It's also frightening that someone has to wait that long to be picked up. Right?
So again, that's why they have like the ambulance planes and helicopters. It's just crazy. So I was lucky enough to stay in Perth for a while, and I have a local friend there, Peter Hullett. Shout out to Peter. He's not listening to this, but I stayed with him for a few days afterwards. It was really awkward. He's now married with 2 kids, but my trip there timed with him first meeting his now wife. And so I actually went on their first few dates with them because
God, you have so many funny dates and accidental date stories.
So, and it was really, really sweet because neither of them made me feel like I was in the way or a third wheel or anything. And I love them both so much. So it was just an honor to be there at the start of their beautiful relationship. But it's quite funny. So I was lucky enough as well because Peter's dad had a boat. So we took a boat out to Rottnest Island, which was just amazing. And that's where I saw quokkas. So they're really cute. I'm going to show you some pictures. I brought up some pictures, okay?
Yeah, show me.
It just makes me laugh because I remember when I was going out there and talking to my Australian friends, some here and some back at home, back in their home of Australia. and I, asking them about like the wildlife I was going to see, and they were all like, it's not like in the, you don't expect kangaroos to be running around in the streets. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a shame,
I also hear that koalas aren't soft.
I don't know. I didn't see any koalas, but here I am in the middle of the city.
Yeah, I remember that picture.
So they were like, yeah, they don't run around in the street.
Oh.
Bullshit. In the middle of Perth, there's an island called Kangaroo Island full of kangaroos.
Oh, it's crazy. They just look like it's a funny looking animal, huh?
I went to the aquarium. I don't think that's a real crocodile.
Oh.
So look at this. This is Western Australia.
Mm.
And this is Texas, and the whole of the UK and Ireland fit in Western Australia.
And
with Singapore as well. And you can see there's still loads of space around it.
Yeah, Jesus, massive.
Like, to get an idea of the size.
Mm-hmm.
This was a statue of a kangaroo, but it's like, how fucking ripped is that kangaroo?
It's like the Vin Diesel of the kangaroo world.
Right? And this was from, I think it's called King's Park or something. There's a massive park in the center of Perth, and that was a view over sort of bay and everything, but really lovely. This is a quokka.
Oh,
so Rottnest Island.
I wouldn't know what I would think that was if you hadn't told me.
I don't think they are in very many places, so they're quite, rare to see one unless you're in their habitat. But they eat their young quite readily, so they're not as cute as they seem. But basically, when you go to Rottnest Island, which is sort of like, an hour on the boat, I guess, from Perth, if this island is overrun by them, which is super cute. So this is us sitting in outside like a bar or a restaurant or whatever, and just loads of quokkas running around. So it's almost like
I'll be honest, you know what? If you added, like, put a rat's tail on that, it would look like a rat. Mm-hmm. How big is it?
Kind of like cat size. I was going to say, it's like when you go to like Greece or Turkey and you get loads of the feral cats that come around and they're super cute. I think they are, but
So were they friendly?
Yeah. This is just Rottnest Island, fucking gorgeous.
You wouldn't want them to give you a kiss though, would you, after they've eaten the young?
No, not really. I'll talk about that picture later. So I had an amazing trip. But while I was there, I learned about one of Perth's serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
The Claremont Killer.
Mm.
Now, this isn't actually the reveal yet.
Okay.
Bradley Robert Edwards was responsible for at least 3 murders, but possibly many more between 1996 and 97. And he was only caught and charged in 2016. So this is, I think, why it came up, because I was there at the time, even though it was a 90s case, that they were getting close and catching him. And I can't remember if while I was out there, like before I went out there, they had managed to catch him and charge him or what. But in any case, he's gone down for it now. So I went to order a book on him, and I accidentally ordered the wrong one. So never mind, because I read about an entirely different Perth serial killer. And it was fascinating because he was actually the last man to be hanged in Western Australia.
When was that?
And this is Eric Edgar Cooke. So this is the book that I got most of my information from. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's by Jack Rosewood and Rebecca Lowe. And it's really, really serendipity is not the right word to use maybe when you're talking about serial killers. But for Christmas, I got a serial killer encyclopedia from a dear friend, Lucy P. Hi, Lucy P.
That's a great present.
Lucy P. might actually be listening to this, so I will shout her out and put her website in the show notes, because she is a fucking amazing singer. She's awesome. She got me for Christmas this serial killer encyclopedia. It's actually by the same people, so I am loving their books. So Eric Edgar Cooke, did you know that the reason why we know a lot of serial killers by their name, which includes their middle name, is to help people who might have a similar name?
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So like we always think like, oh, John Wayne Gacy must have gone around life insisting on everyone calling him John Wayne Gacy instead of just John Gacy. But actually it's because they, you know, Eric Cooke, for example, is probably quite a common name. Eric Edgar Cooke, less common. So there's going to be less people
That's a
tarnished.
fun fact. That's a,
right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, so Eric Edgar Cooke. That was the book that I got most of my information from. And then
it makes me laugh as well, because we have about 4. How many Deanna Safgays do we have in our just immediate family?
Immediate family. And we don't have middle names.
Yeah.
Well, so, yeah, so back to Eric Edgar Cooke. He was born on the 25th of February, 1931. The world was not kind to him, but what he did after with his misfortune was inexcusable. So always going back to this as a theme, at what point can we excuse the behavior, understand the behavior, and at what point does it just become unacceptable, right? So he was born with a cleft lip and a palate, which is sometimes known as a hair lip. And you can imagine 1931, people weren't very progressive about
Did they
this
have
sort of
surgery
thing.
for it then, or no?
Let me get to. He, as a result, was teased a lot at school and amongst the family and so forth. And he even suffered from violence from those who were close to him. He did have corrective surgery, which improved his appearance a lot in terms of the cleft lip, but it meant that he struggled with speech, and then that probably affected his confidence. So he would murmur a lot and so forth. As a result, he was very shy. The book describes him as emotionally unstable, which aren't we all? Eric's parents were Vivian Thomas Cooke and Christine Cooke. They were very young when they got married, and it was a shotgun wedding because Eric was already expected. So his mom was already pregnant. They went on to have 2 more daughters. Vivian, the dad, was a violent alcoholic, and he abused the wife and Eric. He was more lenient to the 2 daughters, which also sort of sparked some sibling rivalry. It was clear he was angry about being forced into this marriage and therefore treated his family like total dog shit. He was particularly cruel to Eric, maybe because he was a boy, but definitely because in the dad's eyes, Eric was deformed, even after the corrective surgery. The mom would often stay over at her place of work, which was a hotel where she was a cleaner, to avoid the violence in the household. And at first I was like,
you're leaving your kids there.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I totally understand escaping the violence, but leaving your kids behind when you know that that dad is abusive towards the kids. So I was a bit judgy. But actually, she claimed she did this to prevent violence towards Eric because he would often step in when the dad was being abusive to the mum to protect his mum, and therefore would receive a beating of his own. So I'm still on the fence.
This is a sad story so far. It's not going to get better, is it?
Yeah, well, we didn't start a happy, happy, joy, joy podcast, did we? Sadly, police officers and educators of the children all knew or suspected what was going on in the household, but no one got involved. Again, it's, you know, it's the times as well as everything else, but it's just really, really sad. I can't help but think if kids in particular, Eric, had been removed from this toxic environment, would he have turned out differently?
Because every serial case, like every serial killer case we look into,
they are normally
it always
fairly intelligent or skilled in some way, that if they had the right direction or influences or opportunities or start in life as other people do, would that have been channeled into a more positive way, you know, than serial killing?
It always starts with abuse in the home, you know.
Yeah,
that's really been the common denominator.
It's really sad. I'm gonna do some more research because obviously not everyone that has an abusive past goes on to become a serial killer. So I'd be really interesting to see what the differences are. You know, like why do some people go down this road and other people do not?
Well,
go
this
down
is the thing. I did some
road.
research on that, and you know, they were saying, like, you know, when one person's a serial killer in their family, but the siblings aren't, and they've all grown up in the same home, why is it affected some differently? And it's something to do with prefrontal cortex or something.
Oh, yeah, because another key indicator is a head injury.
Yes, the answer is it's nature and nurture.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of things, right?
It is nature and nurture. It's a combination of both. The nature being the environment that they grow up in, the abusive home, combined with something to do with the prefrontal cortex of the brain, because they did brain scans. There's been a lot of research on this, so it is a combination of both elements, apparently.
So Eric did really well at school with anything involving memory and also any subjects that involved using his hands. He did suffer extreme bullying and cruelty at the hands of the children because of his deformity. I'm putting that in quotation marks, but also because of his mumbling as a result of his speech impediment. And what often happens is the bullied becomes the bullier. The bully, I should say.
The abused becomes the abuser, huh?
Yeah. And so he started stealing money from teachers when he was just 6 years old.
You know what? I don't judge him for it, because if he didn't come from a home, if he came from poverty, don't know that he did, but
yeah, he did, and we'll go into that. But also 6 years old, you're not meant to know all the rights and wrongs at six. So he was caught often and expelled. He went to 5 different primary schools, constantly being expelled for bad behavior. I mean, 5 primary schools. How many years is primary school? It's only like 6, isn't it?
So far, I feel bad for the kid who's been failed by school, family, everything.
Yeah, 100%. At this point, he is definitely the victim, right?
And it's funny, because every episode we talk about the point at which they stop being the victim. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And they usually... These perpetrators have started off life as a victim, and then it turns and they become the aggressor.
And also, sorry, but children, I don't know what age this stops, but even children committing very bad behavior, they are innocent because someone has failed them. An adult in their life, some adult, usually a series of them, a systematic group of them, have failed them.
Yeah.
So he's still being bullied at every single school that he goes to. And at age 14, he decides to just quit school and get a job. But this is actually much more common in the day. I mean, if we're talking about 1944-ish, 5-ish here. So that was not that unusual. He felt obliged to help the family out because his dad was no longer working due to his alcoholism. So not only is he not working, but he's, I imagine, spending quite a significant amount of their income on alcohol. And his mom was working as a cleaner at the hotel, which clearly is not going to be bringing in that much money. And they're a household of 5. By the age of 18, he'd had quite a few brushes with the law. But he was taken in by Reverend George Jenkins, a minister at the local Methodist church who wanted to help rehabilitate him. So this reverend's obviously seen some good in him. And again, this is a point where there's lots of points in this story where you think, oh, if that had gone differently. Oh, no, if that point had gone differently, maybe it could have spared him going down this path he went, and therefore his victims, right? Eric was actually accepted amongst the young Methodists of the church of the South Perth Methodist Church. And for the first time ever, he actually started having like some semblance of a social life. He enjoyed his Bible classes and was actually, dare I say, happy for a while. But sadly, this does not last. For some reason that I couldn't get, he started attending another church, the Nedlands Methodist Church. He was welcomed by the other parishioners, but actually here he just started developing some severe resentments toward them because he started to see how the other half lived, because his family came from poverty. So he starts stealing from them. And remember, he's still a teenager at this point. But he was very quickly isolated from this community as a result. But before the age of 17, he was mainly just committing petty crimes, minor theft, and peeping Tom activities, which we now know is a major red flag.
You know what? That's a bigger red flag than the theft. So the theft has some logical motive, poverty
and
is...
The theft was largely because he was actually living in poverty.
Yeah.
So
peeping Tom behavior, fucking hell.
That's not to put bread on the table. That's just because you're a fucking dirty perv. So Also, this term just grosses me the fuck out. He was known as a snowdropper. What do you think a snowdropper
I don't know. Tell me quickly, because I don't like, oh God, tell me.
So I don't know if this is an Australian term, but it means someone who steals women's underwear from clotheslines.
Ew.
Which I just hate. I fucking hate that. So again, for me, that's a red flag, right? A lot of his crimes were motivated by money in order to help his mother and his family out, but clearly these peeping Tom and snowdropping activities were something else. But then at the age of 17, he starts breaking into homes and stealing things and vandalizing property. And then he very quickly graduated onto arson. He actually burnt down a church that had rejected him from joining their choir.
Jesus. I mean, all of these are the common denominators in serial killer behavior.
Yeah. So he actually spent 18 months in prison for that one. So he's known to the police. His crimes are escalating very fucking fast because that's age 18 or 17 or 18 that he got committed for arson, and they already know that he's the snowdropper, peeping Tom thief, basically. So again, they said it took a long time for police to realize that Eric was responsible for the murders that I'm going to talk about later on, because although he had a criminal record, he wasn't particularly violent. But to me, right, he once got caught for breaking into a home and boiling that person's goldfish in a pot of water on the stove.
Sake. I mean, come on. This is what I mean about sick and twisted people. Nobody that is wired to know right from wrong would even think about doing that. Do you know what I mean?
And what else do we know is in the McDonald triad that we were just speaking of? The brain injury and I don't know if brain injury's in there, but the abuse is fucking torturing animals. Yeah,
torturing animals, fire. Is peeping Tom in that?
I don't know, but wetting the bed. I mean, I think they've added more things to the triad, but we now know, right, that so many of these things are major red flags.
What's interesting is that often absent violent father, but actually an overbearing, domineering mother also features.
I don't think he necessarily had that, but there's definitely
he had enough there. He had enough,
and there's definitely a difference. Some of his crimes were clearly for survival.
Yeah.
But to me, boiling a goldfish is next level twisted. You can't argue that was for survival in any way.
I mean,
this isn't Yeah, he didn't eat the goldfish. It wasn't for food, you know? This isn't some Jean Valjean, Les Miserables situation where he needed to steal the bread in order to be alive. He fucking boiled a goldfish. Like, I mean, whenever his crimes appeared in local newspapers, often without his name attached because they didn't know he was responsible, he would cut out the articles and show them to people in order to gain respect from them.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine a situation where someone shows me an article like that about a boiled goldfish and goes, that's me. And I'm like, oh, cool. You know?
It's really interesting, all the common threads between serial killers, huh?
Right? So I don't know whether the people he was showing these articles believed him or what, but, it's fucked up.
Yeah, I don't have sympathy for him for those crimes.
No. So in 1953, Eric's around 22 years old. His fingerprint was found at the scene of a burglary. So Eric was arrested. And even though he had previous form for theft, he was actually only given a fine.
Oh.
Then in 1955, 2 years later, he was caught stealing a car because funnily enough, he carried on stealing. And this time he went to prison for a short period. So here's another red flag, but this time about local police officers. Even though Eric was on their radar and his crimes are clearly escalating and not showing any signs of slowing down, the opposite, the book stated that local police officers couldn't help but like Eric.
What the fuck?
Like, surely there must be some kind of training about policing effectively, even if the suspect is charming. Like, surely, I'm sure you have had similar situations as a teacher where you've got a pupil that you actually really, really like, because we all know that teachers have favorites, you know, as much as they're not supposed to show this, where you've got a kid that you really like and maybe you find what they did actually quite funny and not that
Oh my
serious.
God, my favorites are always the naughty ones because they're hilarious.
But you still have to discipline them in the same way, don't you?
Of course. Yeah, of course. But you know what? In the same way, I don't know, to be honest with you, because this is one issue I had, was the one size fits all approach, which I won't go down that road because it's, teaching, and, I don't want to turn this podcast dull, but the one size fits all approach doesn't, it used to make me actually really angry when, this is part of the reason I wanted, the kids not in mainstream, is that an autistic kid having a meltdown would often be treated like a badly behaved child, and that is fucking wrong. So I never did use the same approach for them all, because sometimes a kid is throwing a chair because he's an asshole.
Some kids are assholes.
But I would say that to them. But sometimes, okay, they're kids, I shouldn't say that, but sometimes they're just being a little bit of a dick, to be honest, even then, it's because usually they need support. They always need support.
Oh, 100%.
They're behaving like that. They need support. So I shouldn't say they're not. But their discipline is sometimes. So what I was going to say is sometimes it's because they're overwhelmed. They've got sensory overload. They're having a really fucking bad day. Sometimes they're even having a really fucking bad life. And so, to be honest, I'm showing understanding in that situation.
Yeah,
not not telling them off, but showing understanding. Because the one thing I always said to myself every day, they're not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. So yeah,
that's such a fucking useful lesson in life.
It is.
But
I have to think to myself every day about
everyone and everything. Yeah. Well, I always tell people, if someone's a fucking dick to you, if someone says something negative to you, whatever, it's almost entirely an issue they have themselves and not an issue with you.
Yeah. But you know what? That's the thing. I would always say that, no, actually, you have to treat everyone fairly when you're a teacher, fairly. But actually,
but that fairly doesn't, I think you've raised a good point. Fairly doesn't necessarily mean the same.
Exactly. The same approach is not right for all,
What you're telling me is that your method of disciplining children was based on their situation and what would bring the best outcome. What these police officers are doing with, and what these police officers are doing with Eric, it's like, oh, he's fun to get a drink with, we'll just let him off.
Yeah.
They're clearly not rehabilitating him in any way. They're not making things better in any way, because he's carrying on. So it's just shocking. There must be some kind of training on how to not let your personal feelings influence your decision making in these roles of authority, right?
Yeah.
You just said you had it as a teacher. Anyways, so I mean, maybe they felt a bit sorry for him because they knew about his history and that he struggled with his cleft palate, et cetera, et cetera. But still, they claimed that he was a model prisoner. And again, this raises the issue that always gets me worked up about good behavior in prison, right? Like, surely that means, like, if you go to work and you're really good at work, they don't let you leave early. They're like, oh, because of that, you get to leave on the time that we agreed, And if you're bad, you have to stay longer, right? I don't know why it's not the same in prison. And I get it, that maybe they need incentive to keep people well behaved in prison, because if they rioted, it would be a problem. But I don't know. I don't know how to fix the justice system. I just know how to bitch about it. So
yeah. I mean, one thing's for sure, though, in other countries, they do a better job of rehabilitation, because that's really essential, while prisoners are in there, so that they hopefully don't reoffend, because the chances of them reoffending, the statistics are high once they leave. So rehabilitation is key. And this is why, to be honest, in teaching, I never would scream and shout. And I remember in my training year, the one that was training me said, you've really got to show your anger more. And I said, well, I'm not fucking angry with them. I'm not angry. Because, also the way we weren't raised in a shouty household. So our parents, and this is what I took in teaching, is trying to teach them how to be good people, not ruled by fear, And so anyways, so rehabilitation is key, basically,
I think most people shut down when they have someone shouting at you. You're reducing the amount they're taking in so dramatically.
It does nothing good.
I just want to make it clear, we did not grow up in a quiet household. We're all
because we're all loud people. We're all loud, but shouting and aggression and, even school exclusion, sending a kid away for 2 weeks, is that a solution? All it does is make the school's life easier, but actually all you're doing is exclusion. You are excluding a child from education.
Because one of the things that the police really liked about Eric was that he always confessed when he was caught.
Mm.
And I'm guessing it's because that obviously made their job a lot easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
They even referred to him by his nickname, which was Cookie.
Okay.
Which I don't like because it's too cute for someone who goes on to do the things that he's about to do in his life.
Oh, God.
So back to Eric, he often worked in manual labor jobs, sometimes as a truck driver. He was apparently a really hard worker. But during the 1950s, there wasn't as much work as there is today in Perth. Perth is very much built on like the mining industry and so forth. And now it's fucking thriving. Like, I loved Perth. I didn't think I would. I didn't think I'd have any strong opinion about it. I went there for work, but it was fucking amazing. I really loved it. But when I went in 2016, my friend Peter Hullett was telling me that actually they only made, sorry, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. They only made homosexuality legal about 10 years ago. So say about 15 years previously.
In Australia?
In Western Australia, in Perth.
Fucking hell.
So it's got a weird mix of being really progressive because it's a fairly new big city and having quite traditional opinions and values and stuff. So it was weird. So work was scarce. It was a very remote place. So sometimes supplies were scarce. And many people on the lower pay scales had to resort to petty crimes in order to support their families. So it wasn't uncommon. So just important to put yourself in that context because of stuff that's going to come out later. He joined the permanent military forces, which I think is something along the lines of the Territorial Army or something, it sounds like. And he got really, really good with a gun and trained with lots of forms of weaponry, which for me is just like red flag, red flag. But he got kicked out because they found out about his criminal past. So it's like, hang on a minute. You accepted his application. You trained him up in all these weapons. Then you checked his criminal background?
Oh my God.
Like, that feels like a big failure in the system.
Yeah.
But it's a shame because he was actually genuinely quite passionate about it. And again, like, I'm not pro-military at all. Obviously, Palestinian, we have an innate fear of any kind of military, but he'd found an outlet and he found something he was good at. And this is another one of those points where I'm like, oh, if something had gone differently, maybe he wouldn't have taken that route, you know? Or maybe it would have become worse. Who knows? But he was genuinely upset about being kicked out of the military because he did seem to really enjoy it. So when he was 21, he traveled to Melbourne, which, especially at that age, in that era, was even further distance. And because there were no real forms of communication between the branches like they have now, obviously there's no internet and so forth. So he joined this military branch in Melbourne without them knowing about his criminal past or the fact that he got kicked out of the other branch. But again, after only 3 months there, they found out somehow about his criminal past and he got kicked out again. But not before developing even more understanding on weaponry, which is like, stop training the potential serial killer. Right?
So much of this reminds me of Ed Kemper.
Yeah.
And him working with the police.
Exactly. So he returned to Perth, and rather than admitting that he was kicked out of the military, he claimed that he had been fighting in the Korean War and that he had been injured and that he had a steel plate in his head. Which, to be honest, that's the most relatable thing to me about like, oh no, I didn't get kicked out. I was being a war hero. So in 1953, Eric meets Sarah Levin while he's working as a truck driver and she's waitressing. She was actually from Great Britain. She was only 18 at the time. I think this is when he's around 21 or 2 or something. So what I'm trying to say is appropriate age difference. As we mentioned, Eric could be quite charismatic and likable. I mean, he managed to woo over the police, even though they know his full record, right? So he managed to charm Sarah, who clearly liked a little bit of a bad boy. With no judgment here. We've all been there. They got married in the same year, and Sarah soon started popping out the first of their 7 children.
Oh my God.
Sarah
I'm nervous
knew
for their kids.
right? Sarah knew about the criminal past, but not the full extent of it. She thought he'd only been charged with like a few minor thefts, which he explained was because of his family's financial situation. And like I said, it was super common at the time for the, people living in quite dire situations to resort to petty crimes. So this wouldn't have been as much of a red flag to her, I don't think. And I can also see how he could romanticize that to an 18-year-old, right? So 2 years after they got married, Eric stole a car and was arrested and originally sentenced to 2 years in prison. He was released early, though. But this clearly upset Sarah, as we see far too often, because this is the... As we see far too often, because this is the role model that Eric had witnessed, he started becoming violent towards Sarah and his children. He would often disappear for days, giving Sarah no explanation and getting angry when she would ask. He was often out in the evenings committing burglary, but the money that he stole, he would often use to try to woo other ladies. And Sarah found out about this. His crimes, as we know, were escalating. And in 1959, he came home with scratches on his face, which he told Sarah were from playing with their son, Michael. Two of Eric's children actually came forth and spoke about living in this household when they were very young, when he was finally arrested. So really interesting to hear about the kids' point of view. But, quote, they remember living in constant fear. His moods were unpredictable. He could go from very happy to very violent at the drop of a hat. One son even described his father as a monster. But what I found interesting was that his daughter came forth, one of his daughters, and actually spoke much more positively about her childhood, saying her dad actually called her princess and gave her presents and played with her dolls and so forth. So it's possible, like his own dad, that he treated his sons very differently to his daughters, right? I mean, that's the model that he learned from, and he didn't have any other examples.
It's so sad when the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You would just always hope in those situations that they don't want to put their kids in the same situation, and then they become carbon copies of what.
But how interesting that the boys and the girls growing up in the same household, having very different experiences. Right?
I mean, it's not that weird if he's just copying the behavior he's used to.
But little spoiler, when he came home with scratches on his face, it wasn't from playing with the kids. It was from murdering, which we will hear about soon. So now we're on to violent crimes, right? This is when he committed his first attempted murder. And then in 1959, he committed his first of 8 murders. That's 8 in a fairly small city in a fairly short time. So this city must have been terrorized, right? So let's start with, I don't know if I'm going to say her name right, Penina Berkman, but she was also known as Patricia. On the 30th of January, 1959, he broke into her house. She was 33 years old at the time. It's unclear whether he was intending just to burgle the house, which he was very regularly doing. But while she was sleeping, he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her to death. For me, I feel like that's more intent, because if she was sleeping when he attacked her and killed her, he could have just carried on burgling and leave, right? So fast forward to the 20th of December, 1959. So the same year, he broke into the house of Gillian McPherson Brewer. And again, while she was asleep in bed, he was armed with a pair of scissors and a tomahawk. Eric stabbed Gillian to death and then mutilated her body.
Jesus. I mean, his crimes have escalated.
What makes this case extra sad is that actually another man got blamed for this murder and would have to spend years, decades fighting his innocence. God. More on that later. So fast forward a couple of years to 1963. On the 26th of January, 1963, so let's say 3 years-ish later, 29-year-old Brian Weir was working as an accountant. This is actually Australia Day. He was at home in bed. His head was just visible through his veranda door. So Eric shot him in the head from outside the house. So 100%.
I mean, not that
No.
his other motives were pretty.
No,
Not that
this
they were
guy's
solid,
sleeping in his
but-
house. So I don't know whether he's walking and he
Yes.
just saw this guy and thought,
Mhm.
But I mean, there's his military training, right?
Mhm.
Brian survived but died 3 years later from his injuries. So that must have been a fucking tough 3 years as
Mhm.
well. The shocking thing is that on that same night, Eric continued his crime spree. George Walmsley, a retired grocer, 55 years old, went to answer his door again on the evening of Australia Day, the 26th of January, 1963. Eric was lurking in the shadows and shot George in the head. His wife and daughter found him and he was still alive, but he sadly passed away minutes after. There was, would you believe, a third victim on the same night. That victim was John Sturkey, a 19-year-old student. He was sleeping out on his veranda of the boarding house he resided in because of the heat, because remember, it's January in Australia, so that's their summer. I went out there in their winter and it was fucking hot, so I can't even imagine what their summer's like. So as Sturkey is sleeping on the veranda, Eric shoots him in the head.
What is it with him killing people who are asleep?
And also notice different methods, let's just say, and different type of target. I mean, he's shooting men, he's attacking women, he's using hammers, he's using guns. So this was another reason why it took a while to link them all to the same person and why some of them got blamed on other people.
But what is there something significant about doing it to people who are asleep?
Easy targets. So again, different methods, stabbing, shootings. His MO changes again when he runs over a lady called Rosemary. I say lady, she was 17, so she was basically a child, bless her. He ended her life. Her name was Rosemary Anderson. He sees her walking on the road and he runs her over with a stolen vehicle. She died on the operating table. Yet again, another person was blamed for this. She had a boyfriend at the time who she was having a bit of an argument with, and it took him similarly to the other one, it took him decades to prove his innocence. And again, more on that to follow.
This guy's ruined a lot of people's lives.
Yeah, it's exponential. So the 15th of February, 1963, so about 2 weeks later, you can see that the crimes are mounting up in terms of speed. 24-year-old social worker Lucy Madrill was at home when Eric tried to sneak up on her sleeping in bed. He does like a sleeper, doesn't he? He accidentally knocked over a picture frame, which woke her up. She struggled, but he strangled her until she became unconscious. He then took a cord from the lamp by her bed and strangled her until she passed. This is when his crimes escalate further because he then raped her post-mortem and dragged her outside to a neighbor's lawn. And this is awful. I'm really, really sorry. It's too late for a trigger warning.
Oh, God.
Eric found an empty whiskey bottle from somewhere and violated her body again using this bottle before leaving the bottle in her arms and posing her. So, I mean, this is just fucked up. Fast forward again a few months to the night of the 10th of August, 1963. 18-year-old Shirley MacLeod was babysitting. She fell asleep on the couch when Eric broke in and shot her in the head. She died instantly. The parents she was babysitting for came home and found her body. I mean, can you imagine the horror? On top of the 8 murders attributed to Eric, he also committed 14 other violent crimes, which he was charged for attempted murder for. I mean, these are what we know of. We know he likes to confess, but at this point, I don't know whether he's volunteering information. But they also ranged an MO from assault while people were asleep to attempting to run people over. So again, like Levi Belfield, remember he had lots of different MOs. It confuses matters because it's not so obviously the same person. So I mentioned the first violent crime, which was 1958. Nell Schneider was 26-year-old. She was riding her bike home when Eric ran her over with a stolen car. She survived, but she had intensive head injuries. 25th of November, 1958, Molly MacLeod was attacked in her bed while she was asleep. 27th of December, 1958, Kathy Bellis was run over by Eric. 8th of August, 1959, he assaulted Alex Donkin while she was asleep. 9th of April, 1960, he ran over Glennis Peak. Same thing again on the 13th of May, 1960, with Jill Connell. And then
were these random targets, or were they planned
Yeah.
like Levi Belfield? So where he
Nope.
was sort of,
well, I don't know whether you planned the
stalking them.
attacks, but the targets, the victims, were seemingly random.
Okay.
And then there's a fucking awful case of the three ladies, Maureen Rogers, Georgina Pittman, and Therese Zagami on the 20th of May, 1960. These three ladies were riding their Vespas, living their best life when they got run over by Eric. Luckily, all three of them survived as well. But what a dick.
Hmm.
On the 3rd of March, 1962, Anne Melvin was attacked in her own home. She woke up to feel someone trying to strangle her. She fought back, and what a brave woman, but was sexually assaulted before he fled the scene. So these are all, he was charged for all of these in the end and convicted for all of these in the end. 29th of December, 1962, Peggy Fleury was sexually assaulted in her bed. She escaped when she screamed and her parents rushed to her aid. So is he doing this in the house with other people as well? Like, on the same day as the 3 Australia Day killings in 1963, Nicholas August was having a drink with Rowena Reeves in his car. They noticed someone standing in the shadows watching them. Nicholas threw a bottle at this guy and told him to basically fuck off, at which point Eric fired a rifle into his car. Nicholas was shot once and survived. Rowena was also shot through the wrist and survived. They managed to start the car and flee the scene before they were shot again.
Jesus.
So that was on the same day. I don't know if it was before, after, or during, but that's the same day as he murdered 3 other sleeping men.
Mm.
And then finally, this long list of terror. On the 15th of June, 1963, Carmel Reed was sleeping in her bed and she woke up to find a man in her room. He stabbed her with her own umbrella and started punching her. The fight that ensued woke her neighbor up and Eric ran away. So all of these crimes spanned from 1958, these particularly violent crimes and murders, spanned from 1958 to 1963. So that's 8 murders and 14 very violent attacks.
I keep wondering, the stabbing people and assaulting them in their sleep, how that links back to his childhood. I bet you there's some sort of link.
There must be. I don't know whether
something
it's
to do with the helplessness.
Maybe.
I don't know, that's what I'm thinking.
But so people have struggled to link them all to the same person because of the different types of targets, victims, and the different types of methods used. I don't know what's more or less scary, thinking it's one person doing all this or thinking there's multiple maniacs out there doing attacks. The police never suspected him, though, because even though some of these attacks happened in people's homes and Eric had been convicted of burglary, they just didn't think of him as a violent criminal. He also often used stolen weapons and stolen cars, so it's difficult to trace things back to him. He was clever, so he wore gloves so as not to leave fingerprints, but he made one very stupid mistake, and that was in 1963, after he murdered Shirley MacLeod, he dumped the rifle that he'd stolen and used in her murder. The rifle was spotted by an old couple that reported it to the police. The weapon was sent to ballistics for testing and fingerprinting, and they proved that this was the weapon used in the death of Shirley MacLeod. So they knew that this weapon was used in that murder, but they didn't have any fingerprints on it, so they couldn't link it back to any particular individual. I don't know how they came up with this idea, but they decided to set up a trap. And what they did was they put an exact replica of the gun back where it was found, because they wanted to be able to trap the murderer and catch him if he returned to the weapon. So I don't know why they thought that he would, whether there's research on murderers doing this, I don't know. They must have had a reason to think that the murderer would ever go back to this weapon.
And
Maybe
were there people patrolling and watching? Is that what they were doing?
Yeah, so maybe it was a case that they could tell the weapon was stashed so it wouldn't be found on the murderer. I don't know. But they made a hiding place, and in some move inspired by Tom and Jerry, they ran a fishing line from the rifle to the hiding place so that if it was moved, they would know about it.
Oh my God, it's all so low tech.
Right? Well, I mean, okay, this was like 1950 or whatever, but they didn't know if the killer would come back, and if he did, when. So in any case, they were committed to this plan.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can't think of other cases where a murder weapon was left, but they went back to retrieve it. I'm sure that has happened.
It must have looked more like it was stashed safely rather than abandoned.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I can think. So maybe when I said he dumped the rifle, maybe that's the wrong choice of words. Maybe it was clearly a hiding spot for his rifle. So that if they ever raided his home, they wouldn't find a rifle associated to murders on him, right? I don't know. But they hid in this hiding place for 17 days, which I actually think is very lucky. It could have been longer in my mind.
So he did come back.
I don't know at what point they would have been like, maybe he's not coming back.
But did he come back after 17 days?
After 17 days, 2 officers were on duty and they heard a car approaching. They watched as a man got out of the car and went towards where the rifle was and bent down to pick it up. The 2 detectives grabbed the man and guess who it was? Cookie!
Oh, sorry, I had to yawn. Why did he wait 17 days? Why didn't he go immediately back to retrieve it? Or like you said, was he keeping it hidden there in case his house?
Yeah, I think it was his hiding spot. And so maybe he was like, oh, I fancy a bit of murdering today. Let me go get my gun. So Eric is the one that they catch going back to retrieve this gun that was already proven to be used in at least one of the murders that they have open cases. He was wearing a pair of women's gloves. I don't know whether he thought that this would make his hands smaller and less easy to detect or something, or just to prevent fingerprints. And surprise, surprise, he had a pair of women's underwear in his pockets because he is a dirty perv.
Also, do you think he used to wear women's clothing? Is that part of it as well?
There wasn't anything I read about that, but he did steal women's underwear. He was known to. So.
Yeah.
I guess he had been seen near the spot earlier and had some interaction with the police near the spot earlier in the week. So he tried to claim that he had seen the rifle when he was there earlier and was going to retrieve it or report it to the police. This didn't fly, though, and he was taken to the local police station. They still, at this point, thought he was only responsible for one murder, the murder of Shirley MacLeod. That's the murder that the gun had been tied to. And again, some of the other murders had been blamed on other suspects. And the rest of the murders had such different MOs that it was really hard to link it back to him. But what the police didn't realize is that they had just arrested one of the worst serial killers in Australia. And remember, this is a time before DNA, and Eric had been super careful with fingerprints and so forth. So, but somehow Eric had managed to hide his face from all of the victims that survived, because remember, he still had a scar where his cleft lip was.
Distinctive looking, yeah. How did he manage to hide his face?
I don't know whether it was because they were asleep when he attacked or what. He also had a speech impediment, so he clearly didn't talk to them, because all of those things would have been much easier to link it all to the same person and then tie it to Eric at some point. So
did his military background help him get away with planning and getting away with murders?
I mean, it definitely helped him with the murders, because he was, trained in weaponry, and he had a gun, and he killed a lot of these people with a gun. It might have been easier to identify him sooner if people had a visual of him. And when his wife was told about his murderous activities, she said that she had no idea about any of it. She thought he was just out having affairs with women, which to me is just really sad. So she thought he was just cheating on her, and that's the life she was accepting for herself. And it's even worse than that. He's actually out murdering people.
Yeah.
So on the same day of his arrest, Eric confessed to killing Shirley MacLeod. He probably realized that the evidence was really strong against him. But soon after, and I don't know what led to this, but the officer started suspecting him for the 3 murders on Australia Day, but they didn't have any evidence. Luckily, Eric does the thing that he likes to do and actually confess to his crimes. But he confesses to 8 murders, 14 attempted murders, and 250 burglaries in Perth.
How does he even remember?
Well,
or do you think he's one of these people who kept score because he's very proud of every single crime?
Perhaps, but also remember, Eric had incredibly strong memory skills. He was able to give intricate details about each and every single one of these crimes, leaving them in no doubt that he had in fact committed each and every one of them. He even remembered how much change he'd stolen from purses and what denomination the coins were. So clearly he gave them enough information for them to realize, no, he's not just making false confessions, which we hear about a lot.
So was he confessing because he was proud of his crime and he was quite happy to go to jail for it? Or because he'd been caught?
We'll get there. I think a bit of, definitely some of the seconds. Let me go on. So Eric Edgar Cooke was brought before the Supreme Court of Western Australia on the 25th of November, 1963. Eric had already confessed, so he couldn't claim he was innocent, but his lawyer issued a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. His lawyer, K.W. Hatfield QC, even referred to Eric as a living abnormality, which is just like, I mean, yes, for the murders, but I feel like they're bringing in his cleft palateness and some other stuff
I assume.
in there. Yeah. But they were claiming that he had schizophrenia and therefore was unable to tell right from wrong, which I don't know much about schizophrenia, but I do not think that is a definition of it. And from what I know, people with schizophrenia are much more likely to harm themselves, sadly, than others.
I bet in that day and age, they didn't know an awful lot about all these conditions, you know, and I bet like...
For sure. I mean, we know that the attitude towards any kind of mental health issues was not understanding and compassionate.
And a lot of the times things were all lumped into one category, whereas they're actually much more complex than that, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I heard schizophrenia a lot in those olden days.
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of things were just called that, you know?
So, his horrible childhood and his violent abuse from his father was also brought up. And it was claimed that he might have brain damage as well. That's the frontal lobe injury, because he'd been hospitalized so many times as a child. Yet there was actually no evidence of brain injury. Again, science and medicine and testing has progressed since then, so who knows? The judge sent Eric off to be assessed for mental health issues, and it was rejected that Eric suffered from any kind of schizophrenia or signs of mental illness. His lawyers asked for a second opinion. I don't know whether they had any justification for that, whether they suspected that maybe these doctors were like, fucking let him hang. He's confessing to all these horrible murders. We're not going to do or say anything that'll get him off. Or whether it was just a last-ditch attempt, right? But it was rejected by the judge, this request to get a second opinion. Eric's trial actually only lasted 3 days, which is one of the shortest trials in the history of serial killers. 3 days sounds bonkers. Like, I feel like even a petty theft from a shop would last longer than 3 days these days. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. He was entitled to appeal the sentence, but decided not to. His reasons for this was that he was guilty and deserved the sentence he was given. He even thanked the judge for his punishment. So he clearly had demons that he himself was not at peace with in his own mind. So he confessed, he had a reputation for confessing when he actually was caught, and he seems to have some level of self-awareness that what he's done is wrong.
I would love to know an accurate, like, psychological assessment. Was this all trauma related, or was there something else there?
I don't know.
You know, for example, you know, I keep thinking about Ted Kaczynski, and like when I saw, I can't remember what it was called, Manhunt, and then there was a documentary of his tapes, and like obviously the way they described him without saying it was that he was autistic. You know, when you read about it, they say, oh, he had Asperger's. That's the term that's been medically disused since 2013 for various reasons. It's not a popular term anymore. But, and it's one that I don't use, Asperger's, because it undermines the difficulties. They may have not have cognitive issues, but they may have issues, significant issues, and difficulties, should I say, difficulties in other areas, you know? And that's
kind of, sorry, tangent, but I know that Asperger's is no longer the correct term to use, but what is the term to use instead?
Autism.
Autism. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Because basically the reason it's not a popular term to use among the autism community, and those are the only voices you should listen to when it comes to autism, is that because, you know, they may not have cognitive difficulties, but the difficulties in other areas can be so extreme that mental health is a much bigger issue among people who are autistic who don't have learning difficulties, you know? So, you know, it's not autism isn't high and low. And that's why high and low functioning are really offensive terms as well. It is a circular spectrum, like a pie chart, and that they may have real difficulties in certain segments of the pie chart and not in others. Or like actually one of the best visuals I ever saw was a mixing desk with the faders. But in some areas,
yeah.
And that was a really good visual. I'll post that on our socials.
Yeah.
To explain it, because I really hate it when I hear.
And also, isn't Asperger a Nazi doctor that we want to dissociate from as well?
And you know what? Honestly, his research is he's guilty of a lot of bad things, terrible fucking things, but also so much of autism research up until like recently, 20 years ago, is based on that model where, which is why so many girls slip through the net, because his studies were based on boys. It's not the case that less girls have autism. It's the case that less are picked up because they may show it differently, which is why, they used to say only out of every 4 people who is autistic, 1 is a girl. That's not true. That's not true. There's many girls. It's just that 80% are not picked up until they're adults because they may.
It's important to remember that it was only kind of discovered in the sort of 50s.
Yeah, so after the Second World War, yeah.
Research into autism is in the baby stages.
Yeah, but my point about Ed Kaczynski is that, like, he had some trauma in his life, and if he was autistic and people did not know about it back then, he was not getting the support that he should have had, or he would have been treated as an outsider, which we know from documentaries and things like that, which doesn't excuse what he did. But my point is that back then, it's hard enough to access support these days, let alone back then when we didn't know what the fuck it was,
Yeah.
So that's my point. And that's why I always think about Ted Kaczynski, because obviously the personal connection with autism, I always think it could have turned out different.
Which one was Ted Kaczynski?
The Unabomber.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, the Unabomber. Yeah. So things could have turned out different had people had support. He was bullied. He even had, like, what was that thing where they used to put like metal helmets on people and give them electric shock treatment?
Yeah.
Had some terrible experiences before he decided to go off and live in the woods. And yeah, that's my point, is that I think a lot of people's lives could have turned out different had the condition been identified and had they received appropriate support.
And that's why it's so important to not defund all of these public services like education and social care and so forth, because spotting these cases where kids are not getting the resources, the help, the support, the love that they need is really detrimental to society in a million different ways. And if you don't care about those individuals themselves, then at least you might care about potentially being a victim of a serial killer, because that's how you can make them. So back to Eric. He was scheduled to be hanged at Fremantle Prison within a year, which I actually visited. So it's fucking stunning, the location. And I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute. But Fremantle is like just south of Perth.
I've heard it's a cool place, very hippie-ish.
Yeah, it's like what Brighton is to London. So it's not far. It was like one short train ride. So it's almost like suburb status, but it's just got a really cool laid back hippie-ish vibe. It had a really cool shipwreck museum, which is what popped up when I was showing you pictures earlier, and we'll post all these on the socials, but I just want to show you this. So it had a shipwreck museum where they had like glass bottles that they'd found on different shipwrecks, or like all the medicine pill boxes and all the cutlery, all the plates, and there was an actual shipwreck in there. Can you see? I don't know why I look so scared.
It's a good picture of you.
Thanks. And then this was Fremantle Prison.
Where's the top? Was there no roof?
No. Well, this was the courtyard, the open courtyard, and then there were like interior bits. But it's right on the coast. The view is fucking amazing. It was stunning.
What is the prison now? Hotel. It looks nice there.
It's a museum. But it was so gorgeous location, but you could tell that like in its prison days, it would have been terrifying, because you could see what the cells were like and everything, and they were fucking tiny, and the conditions must have been disgusting. So Eric was there until his hanging, and he was actually the last man to be hanged in Western Australia. Because Eric didn't place any appeals, which can delay execution by, several years at a time, he was executed fairly quickly. in the States, some people can be on death row for like decades, and I can't
Yeah.
imagine. That's another layer of punishment, a form
Oh
of
my
torture
God.
that,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know whether that's taken into account, but is just horrendous. Eric also kept on reiterating that he was responsible for 2 murders that the other 2 men had already been found guilty of. You remember that there was 2 separate murders where 2 separate men were found guilty of
So
them.
was he trying to release those other 2 guys who were wrongly convicted?
Yeah, because I don't know whether this was some sort of redemption thing or whatever, but he was trying to insist. He apparently talked about this incessantly while he was in prison. He was frustrated that he wasn't believed. He even went on hunger strike. So on the day of his execution, his last rites were performed by the reverend who had tried to help him back in the day.
Fuck. Wow.
And took his confession where he once again stated that he was the one responsible for the deaths of Gillian Brewer and Rosemary Anderson.
Why weren't his confession taken on board when he was so honest about everything else? And there was
know,
evidence?
and I don't know whether whereas the other crimes he could present information that only the murderer would know or the attacker would know, whereas these had gone to court, maybe he could have heard the details, or whether it's just fucking lazy policing. They're like, we've already got someone for that, and you're going to be murdered anyways, you know, whatever. For some reason, the state thought he was lying about these 2 crimes, and I can't see why he would benefit from lying about these, unless he'd like struck up a deal with the family or the actual people convicted of them. But in any case, Eric gets executed. When the trapdoor is released, Eric becomes the 154th person to be hanged in Western Australia, and also the last. But now I'm going to take you very quickly back to the 2 murders that Eric claims as his own. So I'm going to tell you about John Button. He was born in Liverpool, in England in 1944, and he moved to Western Australia when he was 19 in 1963. He was celebrating his birthday with his girlfriend Rosemary Anderson at his parents' house. They had a fight. Rosemary left, saying she was going to walk home. John followed her, but she refused to get in his car. We've all been there, haven't we? Where we've been stubborn, maybe a bit drunk, and we make stupid decisions. John apparently stayed in his car and had a cigarette, probably trying to like figure out what the fuck to do, and he's probably angry as well because they've been fighting. And then he decides to follow her to convince her to get back in the car. But what he found, after the space of 1 cigarette, was Rosemary lying on the floor on the side of the road, badly injured. She was alive, but she was unconscious. So John put her in the car and drove her to the nearest doctor. An ambulance was called, but she died shortly after going into the operating room. The police were called, and they took John to the station to interview him. Can you imagine the guilt this guy must feel? Spoiler alert, he didn't do it. We know that already.
But and also how he fucking looks so guilty.
I know.
We always think it's the husband or the boyfriend.
I know, and in this case, it really wasn't. It's just such shit timing and unfortunate.
And can you imagine trying to explain it? We had an argument, and so she didn't get in the car.
And then I lost sight of her for 5 minutes, and then
I would assume if I heard that story, okay, she's afraid to get in the car.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I would come up with so many, like, oh, she's afraid to get in the car because they're having an argument. He got angry, and he did that to her. I mean, that's like oh yeah, so many connections.
Sure, in the 5 minutes that it takes you to have a cigarette,
someone else came along and killed her.
She's walked out of sight, and someone else came along and just by coincidence murdered her. Yeah. This bit makes me sad though. John had a stutter, and again, the misconception. I don't think
So I don't think confused with Eric because of their speech.
No. But with Eric, when he was in school and everything, because of his cleft palate, people often assumed that he was intellectually challenged, shall we say. Yeah. John, he has his stutter, so police assume that it's because he's nervous or hiding something. So again, it's that misconception.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
They didn't let him contact a lawyer or even his parents, and he's only 19, you know, that's still a baby. He was even hit by one of the officers when they interviewed him, and they interviewed him for 22 hours without a break.
Wow.
At which point John just broke down and confessed to the murder.
Oh my God. Oh my God. This is how they get false confessions.
Right? I mean, it's torture. They tortured him. Now we know or hope in this day and age that an interrogation like this would never be acceptable. but we know it still happens, right? Making a Murder season 2. John was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Fuck's sake.
And if you wonder why we make podcasts like this, or when people write books on true crimes and so forth, it's because in 1998, a book called Broken Lives by Estelle Blackburn, one of my new legends, has come out. And let me remind you that this crime happened in 1963. So this book comes out like 35 years after the crime. Estelle Blackburn investigated Eric Edgar Cooke, John Button, and Daryl Beamish, who I'll get onto. And because of this book, the case of John Button was reopened. John Button, in the meantime, 35 years on, still in jail for this murder.
Still?
At the time of this book comes out.
Okay.
One of the most important things to come out of this book was a bit of evidence used at the trial against John Button. He'd been driving a car which had damage to the front of it. And it was claimed that this damage was consistent with having had an accident and hitting something. However, he had an accident, and it was reported 3 weeks previous to Rosemary being killed. So they had on record.
It was on record, yeah.
A justification of why there was this damage on the car. And that what caused this and that accident was what caused that damage. Cut that out. Apparently, the police and the prosecution knew this before the trial, but didn't think it was important to mention. The doctor who treated Rosemary before she died said her injuries were not consistent to the damage, with the damage to John Button's car anyways, and therefore his type of car was not responsible. This was backed up by another expert in the field. They even set up a test using 2 potential vehicles. John's kind of car, which is a Simca, never heard of it, and the car like the car Edgar claimed to be driving when he says he murdered Rosemary. The test proved that it was definitely not John's car that caused the damage to Rosemary's car, and that it could very much be a car like the one that Edgar claimed he was driving when he killed Rosemary. Like, how does that not come out in the fucking trial?
This guy has lost his life.
So eventually, in 2002, that's 39 years after the murder, John Button is freed. John went on to run Western Australia's Innocent Project, which we hear about a lot on true crime podcasts. It's an organization that works with innocent people who have been wrongly convicted, and quite often to death penalty or for life. In 2003, he got a payment from the government for his wrongful conviction. He got 460,000 Australian dollars. So
how much?
460,000 Australian dollars.
I want fucking millions. I want fucking millions, most of your life.
Doesn't feel like enough, right? Considering that this crime happened 39 years ago. But at least he's free now. He's working on this.
How old is
he? He was 19 when he was arrested.
And he was in for...
So he'd be like 60s. His life is gone. His life is gone. You know, his adult life.
Can you imagine ever coming to terms with that and ever not being angry and ever just thinking, I can never make up for all those years. You know, the rest of my life is tainted by this, you know? The
life you've lost, the mental health issues you're bound to have.
The lack of trust in people.
The skills you don't have. I mean, you've not been able to keep up with like modern technology is hard enough to keep up with. Imagine if you've got only very limited access to it in prison. You come out and you're like...
Because he went in several generations ago and you leave it to wake up to a different fucking world that you go back into.
Exactly. Just being able to adapt is...
Poor fucking guy.
Unbelievable.
Literally all he's guilty of is having an argument with his girlfriend.
Yeah. And he even went after her. You know, he went after her, bless him. So now I want to tell you about Daryl Beamish. He was from Western Australia. He was from Western Australia. He was born in 1941. He was a deaf mute.
Oh God, this is going to make me so sad. For fuck's sake.
It will make you a little bit sad, but wait, he wasn't totally innocent.
Okay.
Well, he was 18 years old when the chocolate heiress, Gillian McPherson Brewer, was murdered. She was mutilated with a tomahawk and a pair of scissors, and Daryl was already awaiting sentencing for sex offenses against children and petty crime.
Oh, fuck him, okay.
Again,
my
yeah,
sympathy is gone. Okay.
no, I know, but again, deaf mute, age 18, clearly he has had some trauma
I don't
as
like
well.
it this whole episode.
I know. But
Stop
yeah,
it.
he's not innocent. He's for sure not innocent. I'm not defending this guy whatsoever. But basically, he's already in jail awaiting sentences. So he's easy, low-hanging fruit because he's already in jail, right?
Mhm.
And you remember, these police officers, they sound kind of lazy and they just want to like solve the crimes, in quotation mark, hit their target. So this made him a prime suspect. Apparently, Daryl gave 4 separate confessions regarding the murder of Gillian, but we already know what kind of methods these police officers are using to get their confessions, in quotation marks. Here's a quote from the book. 2 confessions were supposedly given through sign language interpreter. 1 was a written statement, and the final confession was apparently written on the walls of the exercise yard at the prison where he was held. So it's like, they don't, I don't know. It's sounding odd. So he's convicted in 1961 for the murder, mainly based on these confessions. And he was sentenced to death by hanging, which was later commuted to life in prison, of which he served 15 years, which I still don't get. You know, I know this guy's innocent of crime, but I don't understand how you go from death to 15 years.
Yeah.
Death to life, I get, and I support. I don't.
No, but
you know,
like life imprisonment to 15 years. 15 years is not a long time for murder.
For taking, yeah. So I know this. In this case, the guy was innocent of murders, but you know, it's a system I don't understand. So this was also the subject of the book, the Beamish case by Professor of Jurisprudence Peter Brett in 1966, who considered the whole case to be a miscarriage of justice. Because again, there were these confessions, but how were these confessions extracted? And extracted being the correct term. So when Eric confessed to the murder of Gillian Brewer, they appealed against Daryl's conviction immediately. Because now we've got Eric saying, I fucking did it, guys. Eric even went to court with his confession. So he was actually at Daryl Beamish's trial for this murder going, no, guys, I did it. And they still convicted Daryl.
Is it because the police don't want to admit when they've made a royal fuck up?
It must be a combination of these things, right? But the judge thought that Eric was just a liar. Okay, he's not exactly model citizen.
He's actually shown himself to be a pretty fucking honest guy. He's got a lot of other sins, but
yeah, he's fairly honest. But I mean, a dick with it. But yeah, it's just unclear why he would confess to this one murder after he'd been convicted of all these other murders that were proven to be him. It's just weird. But can you imagine? He's actually at the trial where they convict someone else for his murder. They finally managed to
must have been raging that he didn't get the credit.
Well, as we heard, if we believe the things he was saying earlier, he seems to be trying to repent in some way.
It's like when you're at school and you're working on a project with somebody else and you're doing all the work and they get the credit.
So they managed to overturn Daryl's conviction in 2005. Remember, it's like 66 when they have his trial. He was very much helped by the John Button appeal that had been successful, because obviously there's a lot of similarities there, and the Broken Lives book by the amazing Estelle. So 50 years after he'd been wrongly convicted, Daryl received from the Western Australian government 425,000 Australian dollars. So that's like even less than John Button got.
Although he's in jail for less time.
But it just doesn't seem right.
It's shameful that it's not more. It should be really in the millions when you do that to somebody's life.
I mean, you've taken his life. Eric is now buried in Fremantle Cemetery, and the big question is, as always, nature versus nurture. Looking at Eric's motive, it's tough. You seem to just enjoy hurting people and making them feel pain. He seemed to just enjoy hurting people and making them feel pain. That feeling of power and being in control that he clearly didn't have as a child. He got away with it for as long as he did.
And that's why I was thinking the whole killing people in their sleep, is that some sort of parallel with him being a helpless child, you know?
Yeah. He got away with it for as long as he did because he didn't really have a pattern. He attacked men, he attacked women, he used different weapons, different means of getting to his victim. What made Eric evil, or what contributed to it for sure, is his abusive father and the childhood trauma. The abuse he suffered as a result of his cleft palate and the resulting difficulties he had,
Mm-hmm.
the bullying, the blind eye that the police, the
Mm-hmm.
educators, the social workers, the blind eye they turned because they didn't want to get involved. It was all too common. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
He had communication issues due to his speech impediment.
Mm-hmm.
He had a lot of financial obligations because he had a wife and I think what did I say, 6 or 7 children?
Mm-hmm.
He felt a lot of rejection in his life. He was kicked out of the military, which he fucking loved. He was neglected by his own father. He had multiple head injuries as a child. I mean, these are, if you had to make a recipe for a serial killer, these are the things you put in, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people that we talk about on the podcast have experienced really traumatic, upsetting childhoods. And they definitely start off their life being the victim. But as we always say, as we said at the top, at what point does the abuse become the abuser? At what point can we no longer blame what has happened to us as a child? And do we need to take adult responsibility? And is this just me talking from a place of privilege? Because to seek help, you have to know about it. You have to access it. You have to have the confidence to fight for it. You have to understand it. But it's clear that protecting children from these toxic environments is for the benefit of the child, but also for the adult that child will become and potential victims of that adult if they go on to abuse others or worse. But it is a case of opportunity. Will the child have the opportunity to seek help, to find a loving home? Clearly, this environment played a huge impact on Eric and his development. Rather than being loved and nurtured, he was abused and treated with hate. And in a chilling update,
oh God,
in
I'm not ready for this.
in 2021, audio was released from the trial, which I couldn't find. Someone can find it, send it to me. I probably won't listen to it, but I want to have the option. These audios made it clear that Eric felt powerless and hurting people made him feel in control. The most chilling quote, because I read some transcripts, I just wanted to hurt people.
Yeah, I mean, it's just familiar. This is what we come across in most of the cases when you look at their backgrounds, and abusive men in general often came from homes like that. Do you know what I mean?
They want that power back that they lack. We are lucky in that we didn't grow up in that kind of environment.
We're lucky.
Thanks, Mom and Papa Saf.
Yeah, we are lucky also.
You're not listening to this either.
We're not just lucky for what we were exposed to. We're lucky for what we weren't exposed to.
Oh, for sure. Show.
Yeah. So, fucking hell, that was a story. Jesus.
Oh my God. Do you know what we should end on? Maybe every episode we should end on a funny story about Papa Safie.
He's going to hate that.
I know. He's going to hate it. I
know. But I asked I did a poll and I asked our listeners how they'd like us to end our podcast episodes.
Oh my God, can you check if anyone's replied in real time?
Let me check.
I'm just going to eat honey roasted cashews, which are the best kind of cashews.
Okay, so who replied to us? Oh my God, excuse me. Our wine time girls, our favorites. They replied saying, I wish I knew. I feel like we're always all over the place. Good luck. Same.
Okay. Well, at least it's not just us then.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to know, do you want us just to fucking tell the story and leave you alone? Or do you want us to make you feel a little bit better after you heard it?
I feel like this one actually ends on a positive note in that those 2 people that were wrongly convicted eventually got freed.
Yeah. Yes, that's a positive.
I mean, after a fucking decades in jail, but still.
I need to have a whiskey after this episode. I'm teetotal.
Are you?
Yeah, I haven't drunk for years.
But not really. There's a difference between being teetotal.
What does that mean?
Being teetotal means you don't drink at all. You're flat out no.
Okay, well, do you know what? I say teetotal only because I don't have the opportunity to drink. Do you know what? It started with IVF when you're not allowed to drink. Then I have kids with part of the problem is I have kids who have sleep issues. I wake up 3-4 times a night. It's not an attractive thing to propositions.
I know, but I mean, I've been invited by Che for a sleepover tomorrow night. Yeah. I'm bringing a bottle of wine so we can at least have a glass.
Oh my God, you're gonna see on Sunday morning And just imagine when you get woken up at like 5 or 6 in the morning, just think what that's like waking up with a hangover. And that is literally why I don't drink, because I don't go out. That's a great thing. That's the best thing. That's the best part of my life. I'm really antisocial, and I love having the excuse of kids to get out of anything I don't want to have to do. But the only reason I don't drink is because I'm woken up several times in the night because I have sleep issues. And then I'm woken up again at 5 or 6 in the morning, and the last time I properly had a drink was, I think, when I left teaching. That might be the last time I had a drink at all. That was 3-4 years ago. And waking up with a hangover fucking sucks, because the hangover is not just the morning. You feel like fucking shit for the rest of the day. That being said, I may be a secret smoker.
The last time I drank, the last time I got drunk, I was fucking recovering for 3 days after.
Exactly. Honestly, the hangover lasts longer than the night out, and that's the problem. And I'm talking, 2-3 drinks, not talking.
Yeah. I know. It's annoying. It's like 2 glasses of wine the next day is fucking written off. It's like, I didn't even get drunk.
I know.
You're not allowed to have a hangover if you didn't get drunk.
Exactly. And that being said, I do love a glass of wine. It feels great, but it's just.
How about I bring us each one of the little bottles? We just have one glass.
No, don't. We'll just hang out and then, talk shit and then wake up at 6 in the morning without a hangover.
Cool, let's do that.
I still don't know why you want to sleep over when you know you're not going to get a lie in.
I always wake up at like 5 in the morning.
Oh, painful.
So, yeah.
Well, I've got to do some recovering after this episode, because we covered some heavy shit.
Didn't we? I forgot to press record.
Shut the fuck up.
I'm joking.
Oh my God. I swear to God, if that was the case, I fucking would flip my laptop off the table if that was the fucking case. That was convincing, because your face is so straight.
I know. That was great, wasn't it?
All that for nothing.
Literally says recording in the top right-hand corner. Top left-hand corner. Anyway. I'll leave that in because that was fucking hilarious.
I would have flipped the fucking table.
I'm going to ask, Paul, can I make a request that you make that one of our video teasers? All right, guys. We're going to go now because I don't know why. I have time to stay here and chat all day, but I don't.
I have to pick the kids up in 20 minutes. We literally record podcast episodes between the school run.
Tell Che that I will see him tomorrow.
Yep.
And thank you, listeners.
Mwah!
Love you.
Bye. Bye. Hey there. Thanks for being a loyal listener.
Do you need a new website or want to boost your social media performance? Or do you hate podcast editing? You've tried optimizing your website and social media channels, but you're still not getting the listeners, downloads, and engagement you want?
We, the Safier sisters, love helping people with tasks that they hate. We know a thing or two about podcasts, websites, and social media, and we love working with other podcasters and business owners.
So why not head over to switchbladesisterssocialclub.com and go to our Work With Us section. We believe in collaboration over competition. A rising tide raises all ships.
Bye!